All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Cimino. I'm the Administrative Commissioner for New Jersey, current chair of ISFMP. I'm going to call to order the Interstate Fisheries Management Program Policy Board and begin the wrap up of our meeting this spring. So we're going to go for board consent on approval of the agenda. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? Seeing none. And also approval of the proceedings from our January meeting. We got a motion from Pat to approve. Second. There we go from Ben. All right, so we'll consider that approved by consent. Any public comment on items not on the agenda? It looks like we have one. It looks like we have two. So go ahead, and we'll give 2 minutes. Sorry, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Mitchell Feigenbaum. I'm the chairman of the advisory panel for American Eel. I'm a former commissioner in the role of the proxy for the Pennsylvania legislative rep. I've been a member of the AP for approximately 18 years, and I've devoted my entire adult professional life for the last 25 years to the American eel business industry and regulatory management in both Canada and the US. It's very difficult to restrain my comments to 2 minutes. I refrained from making public comments during earlier meetings as well as at the executive committee, and was hoping to engage in maybe 10 minutes of discussion about a very vital matter, but I'll do my best, and we'll see where it goes. I shared these comments with the law enforcement committee yesterday, and I also shared some thoughts in a little bit more elaborate form in some comments that were added to the supplementary materials to the American eel package that were sent out to all board members. There's a serious problem in the Canadian glass eel fishery. It is spilling into the US, and it will only increase in coming years unless the ISFMP plays its part in helping to address them. Canada has become the hub for the illegal, unregulated, and unreported trafficking of baby eels. The situation is described in the Shirashi and Kaifu report included in the meeting materials, which Commissioner Miller referred to yesterday. That report states that Hong Kong imported 150 tons of glass eels from the Americas in 2022, 100 tons from Haiti, 43 tons from Canada, 13 tons from the US. With certainty, I can assure the Commission that those numbers are grossly exaggerated. Still, they reflect a terrible reality. Criminal organizations involved in glass eel smuggling are creating false records and engaging in fraudulent tactics to hide and mislabel a vast number of look-alike eel species that Hong Kong and Chinese importers bring from all over the world. False documents change the apparent origin of illegal eels to make them appear legal. False practices enable criminals to increase the value of cheap eels from places like Indonesia, Africa, and the Philippines by recasting them as highly valued American eel. Organized criminals behind the problem include and are dominated by powerful Chinese interests, Haitian gangs, and native leaders in Canada that do not recognize that country's right to regulate their activities in the fisheries.
If you will, I appreciate you being here and representing the AP for eel. Personally, I just want to say that I agree that this is important, but having you rush through this is probably not the best way to get this information to us. Since you are an advisor, I would encourage you to send information to staff.
Yeah, well, if I may respond, I have sent the information, and I would appeal to the chairman and the commission to indulge me for another 2 or 3 minutes at least to frame the issue and why I feel that it is a matter of ISFMP policy. And while I don't expect the commission to take up the substance of my requests, suggestions, and current concerns today, I would like to get them out on the record, and I can certainly do so in another 3 minutes.
Adam.
I would kindly request, Mr. Chairman, that you see what other participants of the public want to comment, and if they are limited or not, I would request that we defer time from the time that's already on the agenda to hear Mr. Feigenbaum out for a couple more minutes.
Pat?
So I was not going to speak about additional time, but I was going to ask for this to be added under other business, because I've been very engaged with Canada on this particular issue, and I have something to add to the board and potentially a request for a letter to be written.
Mitch, we're going to make time. Because of that, and I apologize. I'm going to give you the option to let us take this up in other business, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, no apology is necessary. I appreciate the attention and the ability to speak at the appropriate time, and I'll be happy to defer my comments until that section of the.
We'll do that then. Thank you. I believe we have two others. So.
Jim Fletcher. And Jim, you just need to unmute yourself.
James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association. I have a question. With the sturgeon being managed the way they are, and the dogfish being managed the way they are, it looks like we're going to be landing smaller fish, and that's going to require the building of processing equipment. My question is, does ISFMP or anywhere in the system other than Sea Grant have funds available to develop equipment to handle small dogfish? Is there any money in ISFMP to develop equipment? Any grants? And Sea Grant is not an option. Thank you.
Jim, there is not any funding for processing, changes in processing by the commission at this time. I think the Dogfish Board can ask for implications to the changes in the dogfish fishery relative to the needed changes for protections to Atlantic sturgeon, though, is a part of the draft addendum document. Next on the list was Tom Lilly, if that's helpful.
Yep. Go ahead, Tom. You have 2 minutes.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you very well.
Okay, great. Yeah, Tom Lilly from Whitehaven, Maryland. Fishermen, charter captains, and 22 conservation groups like Audubon, Sierra Club, Interfaith Partners of the Chesapeake, and the Lutheran congregations have joined together in a resolution asking you to end the factory fishing in Virginia. These groups represent the values of more than 500,000 people across Chesapeake Bay. The poor condition of bay wildlife is damaging their quality of life and that of their children and my grandchildren. Are you going to take action now to consider what they want? Your charter requires a fish management plan to reflect the values of the interested groups. There are 2 peer-reviewed scientific articles concerning Virginia ospreys that are dying off due to menhaden overharvesting. In the study area in Virginia, 150 of 167 nests failed completely. This means that all the babies in 150 nests starved to death, most during the first week of life. There is a saying in law and ethics, res ipsa loquitur. Res ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself. It speaks for action now. Board members, isn't that what you have here, right in front of you here? This board can take action right now by asking on this problem right now, by asking the staff and relevant committees to meet with the sponsors of the resolution and other interested groups in the next month to move forward with management options to solve this problem. Will you do that? Res ipsa loquitur. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. And we have one other. Sorry. Yes, go ahead. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Brian Collins. I'm a concerned citizen from Alexandria, Virginia, and I just wanted to make a couple comments. I'm part of a citizen public community dialogue, and I wanted to share with you the concern that ASMFC is losing credibility with the sport fishing community and the public. And here's why. It appears you are not acknowledging the Chesapeake Bay as a separate ecosystem from the ocean. You manage Menhaden as a single stock. You don't have, excuse me, you don't have any shared scientific data to support your Bay Menhaden quotas. Your ocean and bay quotas overlap. At the mouth of the bay, you allow another 230 million pounds to be taken in addition to 112. Those aren't acknowledged, but we know the fish come in and out of the bay. That's the funnel. Your striped bass regulations do not acknowledge the fact that the Chesapeake Bay is a nursery for the majority of the East Coast striped bass stock. Striped bass live in the bay 9 years before heading to the ocean when they're 32 inches long. That's a captive audience that we need to feed, and it doesn't appear that that's incorporated in any of your science. All the blame is put on sport fishing. Osprey nesting is failing in higher salinity areas, and nobody believes that historical catch of Menhaden is a reasonable metric for validating a quota of 112 million pounds in the bay. That's like a federal agency getting their funding every year. They have to spend it all to validate it. We have some members of your community that are saying we have data that documents how many Menhaden we have in the bay and how many we need, but none of that data is shared with the public. It appears there's no common sense being used in your quota management, and all appearances are from the public because of the things I've said. It appears that you're beholden to special interests, and I appreciate your time to offer public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate that. I know there's been considerable discussions and frustrations with Menhaden management, and we are, I hope, getting the message across that we are listening and doing our best to explain how our multi-species approach is working, and we will continue to do that. So I'm going to move on. I think the next item is for me. Yep. So the report on the executive committee, we had two major items, one being the fiscal year budget. And well, I think both major items are something that we are just extremely fortunate as a commission to have incredible staff that have been running things very smoothly, and no surprise. And in Laura's sector, we went through the fiscal year 25 budget. I don't know if there are any particular comments from executive committee members on the budget, but we're in a situation where even with a couple of lawsuits that are the commission is either dealing with directly or more tangentially, there's money available to deal with that and other issues that have popped up. And we had a motion to accept the fiscal year budget from our AOC out to the executive committee, and that passed unanimously. We went through a legislative update with Alexander, and I think most of you are pretty familiar with where we are there. We went through the future annual meeting update. I will just give you the briefest, which is that we will be meeting in Annapolis this October, I believe. Yeah, this October. And so that is pretty exciting. The folks from Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council are familiar with the location. It's a very nice spot. And lastly, we went through the executive director's performance review. And well, once again, we let Bob off. No, we're just extremely appreciative of Bob's leadership, his direction here when he needs to step in and get us untangled. And there's just incredible performance of everyone on staff that we are somewhat attributing to Bob. So I'll leave that at that. Sorry, Tony, I lost my next agenda. Oh, no, sorry. Okay, so next up is the 2024 State of the Ecosystem Report. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Pat.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but within your chairman's report, one of the things we also considered were our priorities, our legislative and our appropriations priorities. And upon conversations yesterday and then listening to the spiny dogfish conversation as it pertained to sturgeon, it highlighted the fact that, to me, that we also missed an area within our priorities, which were species recovery grants under Section 6. It's not listed as one of our priorities. And Bill Hyatt, our legislative committee chair, sent out an email to the legislative committee this morning saying we should revisit that. But since we're all here, I would urge that we add that as a priority. It's certainly been a priority for the state of Maine. It's been zeroed out along with many other items within the president's budget, but it's going to be key for all of the states in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic as we continue to work on sturgeon related issues. So pass that along for consideration.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, Pat. So I'm going to open it up then to the policy board. Any comments on what Pat and I guess Bill have brought up? Any further thoughts on that? If not, is there any objection to adding that as a priority? I don't see any objections. Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. All right, so the 2024 State of the Ecosystem Report is something that, well, the State of the Ecosystem Report is something that some commission members may not be familiar with, but folks from the New England and Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Councils are. It's something that plays into our important reviews for MSA actions, for our risk policies, socioeconomic stuff in general, climate change stuff in general. And I think, especially in the climate scenario planning context, I would hope that board members would, take into account this just tremendous report that we get every year. It's been added to over the years. It's been honed. Sarah will go through, all the contributors and the amount of work that has gone into this. And I'll just add that for a lot of us, it's one of the favorite presentations we get within a year. And Sarah's kind of our T-Swift, to be honest with you. So I'm going to introduce Sarah Geichis and let her go through the State of the Ecosystem Report. Go ahead, Sarah, when you're ready.
Great, thank you. I'll confirm that you can hear me and you can see my screen.
Hold on, Sarah. I made you the presenter on my computer, but it didn't carry over to the main.
Okay.
So we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay.
As Tony said, we have it on either the webinar or at least hers, but not yet in the room, Sarah. So give us a second.
Okay. Yep. No rush. And let me know if there's something I can do from here that would help.
We are good now.
Okay. Great. All right. Well, I will roll on. Well, first of all, thank you very much for taking this report. What I'm going to give you is a very abbreviated version of what either the Mid-Atlantic or the New England councils would get, but I welcome any questions or feedback that the commission has on this report, and we would love to make it more useful to you as well to the extent that we can. So first, I'll acknowledge the other main contributors here. Joe Caracappa is the editor of the New England report. I'm the editor of the Mid-Atlantic report. And then we have a long list of people who have been working on the data and the sections here. And the contributors to the SOE is a slide with at least 80 names on it at the end of this. So I'll get to that soon. And please jump in if something goes wrong with audio or I say something that doesn't make sense. I welcome that. So just some background on the State of the Ecosystem, or you'll see the acronym SOE. The idea on this report, for those who aren't familiar, is to improve the ecosystem information and synthesis that we can get into the fishery management system. So the idea here is we are showing ecosystem indicators that are linked to management objectives, very general management objectives. This is contextual information. The councils do not take direct action based on this report, but it is intended to provide context for other actions. We've been producing the report since 2016 and evolving it with our management partners, and it is intended to be a fishery relevant subset of what might be a full ecosystem status report. So we don't try to cram everything into this, but just keep it focused on fishery management objectives. We have an open science emphasis. The data, the methods, everything is available to anyone who would like to use them. And this report is used within the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council's ecosystem process. There's several papers there that you can see. So it basically feeds into the risk assessment, and then the risk assessment feeds into conceptual modeling and management strategy evaluation at the mid. And so just to give you an idea of the structure of the reports and some minor changes we've made for 2024, we begin the report with summary pages, and that's mostly what I'm going to go over today. So that just to give you a brief overview. So there's a graphical summary. Page 1 is always a report card relative to management objectives, and the table on the right-hand side there are the objectives that we're looking at. So these are broad scale management objectives pulled from national legislation and guidance on implementing that legislation. So it's things like the definition of optimum yield for federal fisheries is maximizing benefits to the nation in terms of food production and recreational opportunities. So you'll see seafood production and recreation on there. Obviously, we're also trying to have economically viable fisheries, stable fisheries. We have social and cultural objectives and protected species objectives. In order to have those things happen from the ecosystem, there's some supporting and regulating ecosystem services that are necessary. So we also look at things like biomass, productivity, trophic structure, and habitat as objectives. And there's a list of the types of indicators that we report that are aligned with each of those objectives there. So page 1 of the Mid-Atlantic report and pages 1 and 2 of the New England report are these report cards. The next page is summary bullets of risks to meeting management objectives. And then page 3 is new for this year. It's page 4 in the New England report, is a snapshot of 2023, some conditions that we noted and wanted to bring to managers so that everyone would know about them in as close to real time as possible. And then section 2 of the report is going into detail on the performance relative to management objectives. And section 3 is going into detail on the risks to meeting those objectives. And this year we have updated the climate and ecosystem risks section in order to better align it with some of the types of decisions that you make. We also highlight risks that come from offshore wind development. I won't have time to go over those today, but it's not to say there would be no benefits from offshore wind development, but again, these reports are focused on fishery management and what the risks might be from that use of the oceans. So that's the structure. We have some themes for synthesis. So we're trying very hard not to just make this a list of indicators. What we would like is to be able to integrate them and really synthesize what the main messages might be in terms of management implications. So there's 3 ways that we characterize ecosystem change. The first is that there's multiple system drivers. So there are social, biological, physical, and chemical factors that can drive what we see in marine ecosystems. And there's a lot of different pathways. And so what we try to do, obviously we don't have all the answers, but what we try to do is disentangle some of those pathways to the extent that we can when we see a change. And I'll show you an example of that. The changes in those drivers can lead to regime shifts, and this we define as a large, abrupt, and persistent change in the structure and function of an ecosystem. I'm currently in a workshop for the next 2 days where we're hoping to get more clarity on what we mean by all of these words and some scientific consensus. So right now, the reports don't emphasize this too much, but in the future, we would really like to be able to tell you if we've seen one of these large and abrupt changes across many different things in the ecosystem. Regime shifts and changes in the drivers could result in ecosystem reorganization as everything in the system is responding to the new environment. So that's the picture you're seeing there on the bottom right-hand side. And so it's not to say that different regimes are better or worse, they're just different. And so we need to understand how they work in order for our management to be effective within that regime or reorganized ecosystem if that happens. So like I said, right now we mostly emphasize multiple system drivers, but we're moving towards being able to understand whether there has been a regime shift or not, and whether that's resulted in new organization for you to consider in management. Brief words on the scale and figures. So you've gotten both reports for Mid-Atlantic and New England. The Mid-Atlantic State of the Ecosystem Report covers generally indicators for the Mid-Atlantic Bight there in light blue in the map. And the New England report covers indicators for both the Gulf of Maine and Georges Bank in the darker blue colors on the map. But there are some indicators that are coast-wide, and I'll show you a couple examples of those today. Everything in red here in these slides is a link to an online supplement. So there's a glossary of terms, technical methods, the data itself, and a catalog going into detail, and the indicators are all available online, and we welcome feedback on any of that information to make it more useful to you. So that you can understand the standardized figures in the report, this is kind of a key, and what we're using here is one of our indicators on changes in along shelf distance and depth of all of the species together on the Northeast Fisheries Science Center trawl survey. So our time series figures will have time on the x-axis, obviously, and they'll have whatever the indicator is listed on the y-axis. And then the black dots are the observations, the lines can connect them. And if you see an orange line, that means there's a significant increase in the indicator. If you see a purple line, that means there's a significant decrease in the indicator. The gray shading in the end is showing you the most recent 10 years, just so you can orient to what the most recent years have been doing for relative to the whole time series. And the dashed line is the time series average, just so you know, like now, are we above or below the time series average? We only assess trends for 30+ years right now, but that may change next year. So if you don't see a line, either the time series is less than 30 years or there is no significant trend. So that's a little orientation there. And so I'm just going to go through the results of all of the reports right now, and then I'll walk you through a couple of examples. Obviously, we won't go through everything. But for the Mid-Atlantic, the performance relative to management objectives is listed on the first page, and you're not to be able to read this. I'm just going to walk you through what it says. So we do trend, status, and implications on the first page. So both seafood production and profits are showing long-term declining trends in the Mid-Atlantic, and both are below the long-term average right now. Recreational opportunities are kind of a mixed bag. So effort is up and above long-term average, but effort diversity in terms of the number of different kind of sectors of the recreational fleet is actually declining significantly and below the long-term average. Our stability indicators are fairly mixed and mostly showing stability in both the fisheries and the ecological side. We have social and cultural indicators that are not trend indicators, but just status, and those look at fishing engagement and reliance by fishing communities and environmental justice vulnerability by community. So the engagement and reliance characterizes the fishing community, but the environmental justice vulnerability characterizes the entire municipality of that community. So that helps people understand if the major fishing communities are facing challenges in terms of just community structure that might be affected by, say, climate change or regulatory change. And then for protected species objectives, we have two of them that we highlight: maintaining bycatch below thresholds, and those objectives are currently being met for harbor porpoise and gray seals, although the trends in bycatch are mixed between those two, and recovering endangered populations. So in the Mid-Atlantic and across all the systems, that's NARW's North Atlantic right whale, and as I think everyone knows, that population has a declining trend right now and is still well below its recovery target. So that is where we're at with protected species. So now I'll go through, we have the same page for New England, but we split them into two because we emphasize Georges Bank indicators and Gulf of Maine indicators separately. And so what you see is a slightly different story on Georges Bank. Seafood production is basically total production does not have a trend, but the species managed by the New England Council are declining, and both are below the long-term average. Similarly, profits do not have a trend, but they're currently above the long-term average on Georges Bank. Recreational opportunities are not showing trends either in effort or effort diversity, and are just about around the long-term average. For stability, this also is similar to the Mid-Atlantic in that the trends are kind of mixed, but commercial fishery stability, it's a diversity indicator, is actually down on Georges Bank, whereas the recreational and ecological indicators are all kind of mixed and near the long-term average, indicating relative stability. Same indicators, but for New England, for social and cultural, and protected species have basically the same as in the Mid-Atlantic, except gray seal can be looked at here. So that is that species is actually above the long-term average and increasing. Similarly, in the Gulf of Maine, I've grayed out the ones that are identical between Gulf of Maine and Georges Bank. But in Gulf of Maine, seafood production is again different. So long-term declining trend and below the long-term average, more similar to the mid. And profits are above the long-term average for total, but declining and below long-term average for New England managed species. And the additional endangered species here in the Gulf of Maine is salmon, and that is showing a downward trajectory and below long-term average. So when we start to look at risks to meeting fishery management objectives, I've kind of combined those for both reports on this slide. And I'll go through one of these in detail for you, but right now, the way we've organized these is to talk about risks to spatial management, to seasonal management, and to quota setting and rebuilding. What are those risks that climate is posing to those? So in summary, what we're seeing are definitely shifts in fish and protected species distributions. I'll show you those. We're also seeing changing spawning and migration timing, which might have implications for any regulations that are trying to align seasons with when fish are available or when there's not spawning or not spawning. And also we're seeing multiple stocks with poor conditioning and declining productivity. For other ocean uses, we focus on offshore wind development, and what we list in the report is current revenue in the proposed lease areas. So that can be up to 23% by Mid-Atlantic ports and 34% by New England ports. And some of these ports do have environmental justice concerns that may make them have a harder time adjusting to change. And for the species themselves, it's up to 20% of revenue by Mid-Atlantic managed species and up to 54% by New England managed species. There are overlaps of offshore wind areas with important right whale foraging habitats, which potentially increases vessel strike and noise risks. And in the Gulf of Maine, there is an integrated ecosystem assessment in progress that's looking at Gulf of Maine fisheries and offshore wind. So that could be some information that would be useful to you all in the future. This is our highlights of 2023. This is a new summary page this year, and we welcome feedback on this if you think this type of thing is useful. It's the first time we've done it. So the notable events in 2023 include construction actually starting on some of these wind projects. So South Fork and Vineyard Wind 1 started construction. There was a scallop die-off in the elephant trunk between 2022 and 2023. We were noting hypoxia and mortality events in New Jersey coastal waters over the summer in 2023. However, there was record low hypoxia in Chesapeake Bay. So it shows that these conditions really can change spatially. We had a summer phytoplankton bloom that was just off the scale in the Gulf of Maine, and the Gulf of Maine had the second ranked bottom temperature heat wave that we've noted over the time series that we've got. There was warm water everywhere in the Northwest Atlantic except in spring on the Northeast US shelf. So again, these conditions can really vary here locally. We're seeing a lot of changes in the Gulf Stream that alter the shelf break habitats that could be really important to some of the squid fisheries and other fisheries out on the edge. And this was an El Nino year in 2023. It was the warmest year on record globally. And again, is there because we do report quite often that we've just had the warmest year on record globally. So that's something that a trend that continues. So I'm just going to take the remaining time here and walk you through a couple of more in-depth examples. The councils would get the full report, but we're not going to, we'll spare you that today. So I'm going to walk you through what the seafood production objective looks like in terms of the indicators for both the Mid-Atlantic and New England. And so the indicators we have for seafood production, which is again declining and below the long-term average, are commercial landings over on the left-hand side of the screen and recreational harvest on the right-hand side. And you can see those purple lines for significant decreasing trends for several of our indicators. So the question is, what's driving this? And so what we try to do in the report is go through and look at things like ecosystem and stock production, management actions, stock status, market conditions, environmental change, et cetera, to try to sort out what may be driving this. So in the Mid-Atlantic, the first thing we look at is stock status, and that's the plot on the left-hand side. And I think you can see most of the Mid-Atlantic stocks are in pretty good shape. They've got good status. There's a couple that are below the biomass limit. There's one below the biomass limit, a couple below the target, and one that's currently above the fishing mortality threshold. But in general, most of these stocks have decent status. So it suggests that stock status alone isn't driving landings in this region. We also look at total ABC or ACL and the realized catch relative to the management target. And in the Mid-Atlantic, this is fairly flat for the last decade or so. So it suggests that it isn't big changes in allowable catch that are driving landings declines. Similarly, the catch within that target has been mostly within the target. So the red line in the plot below here on the lower right-hand side is where the median catch is across all the years. There are a few things that go above the allowable catch, but for the most part, things are below. So it suggests that they don't really have binding limits, most of them, and management is likely less to be playing a role in that landings decline so much. We can look at biomass in the ecosystem, and that too doesn't appear to drive the landings trend. So what you're seeing here are spring and fall, the two columns on the left-hand side, with piscivores, benthivores, planktivores, and benthos. So basically your different trophic levels of biomass in the ecosystem from both the Northeast Fisheries Science Center bottom trawl survey and the NEOMAP survey in red. And none of these have declining trends, basically. A couple of them have increasing trends. So that suggests it's not overall biomass in the system. So what we look at here then is we break up those landings into those same trophic levels, and we can ask, well, which portions of those might be driving it? So we see two negative trends. One is planktivores in the mid. This is actually the long-term fishery consolidation in the Menhaden fishery that's driving this trend here. And then for benthos in the mid, we're seeing both in red, that's mid-Atlantic managed benthos, that's surf clams and ocean quahogs. And in black, it adds the New England managed ones, so that's scallops. And basically the suggestion here is it's markets for the surf clam and ocean quahogs because they're not currently hitting their quotas, and possibly availability of scallops that are driving this decline in landings for benthos in the mid-Atlantic. So the report suggests continued monitoring though for things like climate risks, because benthos are really economically important and also somewhat susceptible to things like ocean acidification and temperature, and to keep monitoring things like ecosystem composition and production changes that are shown later in the report, as well as changes in fishing engagement, which can all affect landings. For the story in New England, similar decline in commercial and recreational landings, but possibly different drivers in New England. So we go through the same set of indicators, and in New England, there's actually more stocks that have status that would require rebuilding. And so that does suggest that keeping landings low to allow rebuilding is one of the reasons that we see lower landings in New England. Survey biomass, though, looks a lot like in the Mid-Atlantic. We don't see big declining trends here, so that suggests biomass is an unlikely driver for the landings trends in New England. And we can break those up similarly to the Mid-Atlantic and asks what's going on here. So we do see declines in piscivores in both Georges Bank and the Gulf of Maine, and planktivores in the Gulf of Maine, benthivores in Georges. So a lot of these do have to do with requirement to rebuild some of the individual stocks, which may actually constrain fisheries for other stocks, as well as market dynamics. There's probably other things affecting recreational landings, though. For sharks, it's fishery management and possibly the survey methodology that we use for understanding recreational fishing. And the same recommendations to monitor changes in the ecosystem for landings drivers in New England. So slightly different story, maybe different drivers, but that's an example of how we try to look at multiple system drivers. And I'll just briefly show you one of our risk sections for meeting fishery management objectives. That's fish distribution shifts and cetacean distribution shifts. So these are risks to spatial management. And we are, as you know, seeing changes in distributions all across the ecosystem. These are coast-wide indicators that are in both reports. So we see this increase in along shelf distance. That means basically everything's moving to the northeast in terms of fish and invertebrates on the Northeast Fisheries Science Center bottom trawl survey. They're also moving into deeper water over time. For cetaceans, this one's broken up by seasons. You see a lot of these species are moving in the same direction, with some moving in a different direction by season. So it's not always in the same direction, but there is a lot of movement going on out there with a lot of our managed populations. And some of the drivers potentially of that could be forage fish shifting. It could be changes in temperature and changing ocean habitat. So just briefly, some of the indicators on those. We're seeing eastward and northward significant increases of forage fish in the fall all across the shelf. We're seeing a long-term increase in sea surface temperature. I think that's well known to everyone, but especially the last decade, it's been very warm. We're seeing a change in the Gulf Stream where it's getting further north along the coast. and that will change the habitat available to these species and potentially drive distribution shifts. And another important component of the habitat is the mid-Atlantic cold pool. We're seeing that cold pool get both warmer over time and smaller over time. And so these changes in habitat, temperature, and forage will all probably drive some of these changes in distribution that we're seeing. And so the outcome here is we're suggesting that the distribution shifts are basically unlikely to flip back. They're likely to continue. And so what we're hoping to have online soon is near-term oceanographic forecasts, but we're going to have to also understand how some of the changes in ocean habitats are affecting these species. So the good news is I think ASMFC as well as the councils are involved in the East Coast climate scenario planning, which I think will help coordinate some of the management here. And there's a lot of projects going on with near-term predictions of distribution shifts. So hope to bring you more information on this in the future. I'll just end with the 2023 highlights because these may be of interest to folks on the commission. So we're seeing hypoxia, like I said, and ocean acidification off New Jersey in 2023. So the pink line over here in the middle plot is showing you where there was dissolved oxygen less than 3 milligrams per liter. That's kind of a big deal in the coastal ocean, doesn't happen very often. The red X's are showing where there were mortality events. But again, like I said, it was record low hypoxia in Chesapeake Bay. So it's not like a blanket statement how things are changing in the oceans here. The sea scallop recruitment that was detected to be strong in spring of 2022 was basically gone in 2023, and we think this was a mortality event. And what we're showing over here on the right-hand side of the screen is the number of days in 2022 where bottom temperatures were at or above the scallop stress temperature. That's about 17 to 19 degrees C. And this box here is the elephant trunk area, and the light green is showing you that those temperatures at the bottom that are stressful for scallops were experienced for over a month in 2022. So that's some suggestions that we are seeing enough changes in the habitat that could start to affect some of these important commercial and recreational species. The other thing, like I said, the Gulf Stream was actually inshore and had fewer rings in 2023. So this can affect things like the offshore ilex fishery as well as any of the other fisheries along the shelf. And we did see warm waters get all the way up onto the shelf, which can be episodic events that could threaten some of these species, especially the ones that aren't mobile like scallops. So we don't know the implications of this yet, but it's something we'll be keeping an eye out for future reports. And similarly, there was a huge phytoplankton bloom in the Gulf of Maine, as well as a bottom heat wave. So you're seeing in the plot, the red is how much higher it was than normal for the chlorophyll. In the Gulf of Maine, it spread down into Georges Bank, a little bit into the mid. You can see the green line is the chlorophyll for each of our regions, Georges Bank, Gulf of Maine, and Mid-Atlantic. And you can see the Gulf of Maine this summer was off the charts here. This was not a species that's typically eaten by a lot of things, so it's not clear that it's going to make its way into the food web. So the jury's still out on what impacts this might have, but again, we'll keep an eye on this for everyone and report back next year. So I want to thank everyone for your attention. I know that was kind of a whirlwind, but I just wanted to give you a taste of what the reports are like. This is a list, we hope, that's complete of the people who are contributing to this report. There are many. There's at least 20 institutions, at least 80 contributors here, and we have to thank them all because this could not be done without them. And I'll leave you with some references, and also these are links to the additional resources for anyone who'd like to follow up, and I welcome any questions or feedback. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sarah. That was fantastic. And as enjoyable as the longer presentations are for the councils, I truly appreciate getting this out to the commission and you taking the time to help us do that. I think it's a tremendous tool. There are many elements of the report now that are, I think, that are just stuff that states can have at their fingertips that they just couldn't do on their own. And so I encourage anyone who hasn't looked at these reports to please do so. And as Sarah said, she's ready for questions, or she would appreciate feedback or comments. Thank you. So I'll look for hands. Jason McNamee.
Hey, Dr. Gates, thank you very much. Great presentation. Always really enjoy these, as Joe mentioned. I look forward to them. So, another great, I guess, couple of reports here, good context. I wanted to, in particular, mention, I think you guys are so thoughtful about the visualizations that you put into the report. So, I appreciate that. I think they're great. They're super intuitive, and I always get good ideas from looking at the way you guys visualize the information. Just feedback, and you requested it during your presentation. I like the notable events or your kind of like headline parts of the report. It's great. I think we all think of different things that happen locally, but it's nice to get that kind of, the headlines from the group of experts, like what you saw as being particularly important. So I like that. I hope you keep that. And then the final comment I'll make is there's a risk policy, I'm trying to think, initiative going on at the New England Council right now, and the commission has also been working on one for a couple of years. And so I see these reports as being super critical to those. And so the one that we're looking at for the New England Council, which is still in development, it has a lot of similarities to what we're looking at the commission as well. And it has these kind of categories in it that will need at some point indicators to kind of put the information in there to know if we're in a good spot or a bad spot or what have you. And so I just wanted to flag that for you and your group. I'm guessing at some point we're going to need to connect in with you all to start to hone in on kind of a core set of these indices. In particular, I think some of them are intuitive for us, but the socioeconomic indicators, and so far both of the risk policies have that type of information in them. And so that's just a flag for you. I'd love to, we'd love to, I'm guessing, connect with you all to knock heads on that a little bit at some point. And, I offer that because I think I always really enjoy these reports. I think they provide awesome context, but I also always try and think about ways we can operationalize some of this stuff. And these risk policies, I think, are a place that we can really operationalize directly some of this information. So sorry, that was probably longer than you wanted, Mr. Chair, but appreciate the time.
No, thanks, Chair. Other hands? Lauren, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our speaker for a fascinating report. Early on in the report, under the section relating to recreational opportunities, I took note of two terms, effort, and as a lifelong angler, I certainly understand effort. But the second term, effort diversity, I'd like to have a little bit of clarity about that. For example, does that relate to the angler seeking different species or focusing on different habitat areas, for example, inshore or offshore, or even the amount of time spent on the water? A clarification would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And sorry, I could have shown those indicators, but I selected the landings one instead. So the effort diversity is actually, it's broader than what you're describing. It's intended to get a picture like across a really big area. So the effort diversity is more by just sector. So it's asking basically what proportion of the recreational effort is from shore-based angling, from party charter, or from head boats. Let's see. Yeah, I think it's really just 3 sectors, and I apologize because this is not my area of expertise, but the diversity is looking at the composition of the full recreational effort across those sectors. And what we're seeing is decline basically in the party charter component of recreational fishing, and a shift more towards shore-based angling. And so what that suggests in the report is that there are the overall number of recreational opportunities has been increasing, but the sort of different options to participate in the recreational fishery are changing and possibly reduced because of this reduction in the party charter fleet. I hope that helps.
Yes, Lauren's nodding his head, and it does for me as well. And I know that, you know, I can only speak for what we've been requesting in the Mid-Atlantic. And part of that, Lauren, is, you know, to understand opportunities and what is, you know, what's changing and what you know, we need to focus on. So I believe I saw Lynn's hand. Go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Geitschitz, for this awesome presentation. I really appreciate you and your team and your ability, your really big thinking, and then your ability to distill it into something like this. I have some questions, or a question, sort of a little bit of feedback, and you know, about the Chesapeake Bay. And I know that we're starting to get some information about the Bay to you through the Chesapeake Bay, the NOAA Chesapeake Bay office. But I wonder about how to, if there's a way to tackle places where the Bay is really linked to some of these ocean indicators that you're looking at. And I took note of figure 55 in particular, which shows the path of that Gulf Stream in October, which is about the time when we'd have all those baby calanectes out there, the little blue crabs. And, you know, we're suffering from low blue crab recruitment in the Chesapeake right now. And, you know, there are some of these real key bay species and obviously coastal species like striped bass that are just, they're linked from ocean conditions to bay conditions. And I don't know, I mean, that's really hard stuff to get at, but I just throw it out there. Wondered if you guys could do that, because with your big thinking, that's just awesome. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the excellent suggestion. We do get really good stuff from the NOAA Chesapeake Bay office each year as a contribution to the report. That's how we knew that hypoxia was lower than average this year. But I think that's a really excellent point, because I think right now, you know, we've got all our data in the coastal ocean, they've got all their data in the Bay, and we've been putting them in the same report, but have not been able to spend much effort into synthesizing connections. I really like that suggestion, and let me talk to the folks there who are contributing and see if there's some way we can start to work on that. My guess is we won't have a great answer for you in next year's report, but if we work towards it, I think we can start to get there. I think we'd all really like to see the estuarine coastal ocean connectivity a bit more. So thank you very much for that comment.
Any other hands, comments? John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the fascinating report, Dr. Gage. So I was just curious about a couple of the trends you mentioned there. The ocean hypoxia, is that something that has periodically occurred over the years, or is it something that's increasing? And then with the Gulf Stream shift, is that something that seems to be a more permanent feature, or is that something that moves back and forth over time?
Yes, thank you for the questions. I'll do my best to answer them. I'm not a physical oceanographer, but my understanding is that the hypoxia that we observed in the coastal ocean is uncommon. You can get hypoxia in bays and enclosed waters because, you know, they're enclosed and the water can kind of sit there and deplete, the oxygen is depleted if there's too many nutrients, but the coastal ocean is much more open. So it's unusual to see this type of thing happen in the ocean, and it's kind of a confluence of like temperature and also the local oceanography, maybe trapping water where it, you know, would normally be kind of ventilated more. My understanding is this is rare, but we don't know if we're going to keep seeing it. And luckily, Rutgers has these different gliders out there measuring it in real time. So we are definitely going to keep an eye on that and try to understand whether something has changed, and we can expect to see this more. In terms of the Gulf Stream, again, I'm not a physical oceanographer, but people were really, I don't know how to put it into words. The oceanographers were very kind of excited about 2023 because of how different it was. And the Gulf Stream was doing things that they hadn't really seen before. And so they are also trying to understand if this is a new pattern that we're locked into or if it's just being variable. So My understanding is the Gulf Stream has gotten more variable over time. So it's got more of these meanders and it can make more of these warm core rings, which is the plot you're seeing in the top right here. And there was kind of a shift from having maybe 20 rings per year to having something more like 35 rings per year and right around 2000 that was noted. But then recently, again, this year, it kind of dropped back down into the 20 range. But the Gulf Stream was acting very differently. So I think that we still don't understand if this type of behavior from the Gulf Stream is to be expected more in the future, or if this was just a one-off thing in 2023, but is definitely something we're keeping an eye on because the Gulf Stream is extremely influential, as you know, on what's going on in the coastal ocean here. So we're seeing the oceanographers just keep using the word crazy for this, and I trust them. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but that's why we put this out there. We want to kind of keep an eye on it. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll just follow up, John, as far as monitoring off the coast of New Jersey. DEP, I'm proud to say, has been doing that for quite a few years. And DEP also DEP and the Board of Public Utilities in New Jersey have required through the offshore wind solicitations money to go into research and monitoring. And so not only will we be continuing the work that we've done with the gliders, but we're going to be adding to that in several areas. So, any other hands? We had two. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Well, Sarah, I'll take a minute, and I apologize if I should know this. At the councils, we ask a lot of these reports, but is there kind of like at the end of a peer review, is there a research recommendations? Are there things that we have listed out as priorities that, that we also have wanted to look at, but we just don't have the data? And so that there is something available to say, if the funding is ever available, that we would kind of dive into that.
Yes, I think what we do is kind of gather comments from all of our management partners, and we produce a list. And so I think I sent you all that. It's called the request memo, and currently it has the request from the Mid-Atlantic and New England councils. If AFMSC would like to add to that, like obviously we can't get to all of it right now, and we are trying to prioritize that. So we've worked through that with the Mid-Atlantic Council, and this year we'd really like to work through it with both councils, but there's probably common things that are useful to all the managers in there, and I would love to have the commission as part of that as well. So I think you can send us written comments. You can just, send us an email, and we keep that list so that we know what the highest priorities are. So we don't just always do the easy thing, and we're actually working towards doing the harder things that take a little bit of time. And we do use that to, when we can get extra money or extra funding, to put somebody on specific indicators or projects. So is that what you were getting at? We'd be happy to have more comments from the commission.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess what I'm getting at is I should have known that. But Tony also has a comment, so I'm going to let her go.
I'll also say, and thanks so much, Sarah, for presenting. I really enjoy these reports, and it usually takes me a couple of times to absorb it all in. Sarah presented this report to the core team, which is the team that works on the East Coast Climate Change Scenario Planning Group, and the 5 management bodies will set priorities each year for all of the councils, the commission, and NOAA to think about what of the draft action plan items that we want to tackle. And we use this report as one of our items to try to figure out what is needed to be updated or changed in that draft action plan. One of the things that we talked about is trying to help get additional funding for Sarah's group so that they could include more state water bodies. We're lucky that we got the Chesapeake Bay information because of that. NOAA Chesapeake Bay office can provide it to them. And it's not that, from what I understand from Sarah, it's not that they don't want to include that data, but they just don't have the staff resources to bring that additional data in and then synthesize it and get it into these reports. And so that is one of the priorities that the core team did put in there, to have that additional, those additional resources so that these reports can have some additional information for the states to help us better understand how our state water bodies interact with these ecosystems.
Thanks, Tony. Any other hands on this? Okay, I'm not seeing any. You said there's one on. Okay, well, I'm going to turn to the public then. We have one online. Mr. Fletcher, go ahead.
James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association. I have a question. If I made the same presentation and laid it all to nano and microplastics and plastics, none of the other things that you mentioned, just nanoplastics, microplastics, and plastics and man-made other chemicals, couldn't I make the same presentation and lay it all to the introduction of plastics and the plastics in the Chesapeake Bay and the plastics on the bottom where the scallops are? Isn't this program totally missing the effects of plastics, micro, nano, and even smaller? My question is, why did nothing in this report mention plastics? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah,
Oh,
thank you. I appreciate that. And I agree. We don't have a lot of information on that. And I think it's sort of a missing piece for us is pollution in the offshore environment. So I think if we could get the additional resources, I think that's something that we could look into. For the scallop die-off in particular, I know that the research track working group is looking at multiple things, not just temperature. They are looking at things like disease. And so I think contaminants are not off the table there at all. I just don't know what information they might have. But I would say that we're not ignoring it. We just don't have great data on it. Thanks.
Thank you. So we don't have any other hands online, but I will ask if there's any members of the public in the room. It doesn't look like there's many members of the public that have any feedback for Dr. Geitjes. Not seeing any, Sarah. I think you're off the hook. And I once again really appreciate you taking the time to do this, presenting this to the commission, and I hope that our board members will continue to use this as a tool.
Great, thank you. I'll stop sharing now and hopefully I won't break anything.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're back in control, sir. Commission members should be familiar with the industry-based survey discussions that have come up recently and the importance of them. So our next agenda item is the Northeast Trawl Advisory Program Progress Report on the industry-based, or they like to call it IBS for some weird reason, survey pilot program. I like to call it the moderate to severe industry-based survey program. But so we're going to turn this over. Sorry, Dan.
That's quite all right. You got me, Chair?
Yeah.
Okay, no, not a problem. Yeah, I've heard that joke a number of times already, so definitely understand where you're going on that one. So for those that don't know me, my name is Dan Salerno. I'm a New England Fishery Management Council member from New Hampshire. I'm also the Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel co-chair for the New England Management Council. And I also want to make sure I understand that this report that I'm presenting to you guys has already been presenting to the New England Fishery Management Council and the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. And this report has been put together by not only myself, but also the co-chair from the Mid-Atlantic, which is Wes Townsend, who's also the chair of the council, and also Dr. Catherine Ford, who is our Northeast Fisheries Science Center lead. And although she's not mentioned on here, we couldn't have put this presentation together without our Mid-Atlantic staffer, Hannah Hart. So yeah, I'll just jump right into it. So if you want to go to the next slide. So just to kind of give a sense of where we're at, the industry-based survey is actually part of a larger contingency plan. We have put together the Bigelow contingency plan. This was put together, because we've known in the recent past that the Bigelow in itself, the performance has been not as good as it should be. And even when you take out the consideration of the COVID years, survey performance and tow completion has been a little suspect in the past couple years. So there was a request to develop a contingency plan basically when the Bigelow is not available on short notice. So this doesn't take into account when the Bigelow is going to be going offline for its midlife repair in a couple of years. We already know that that's the case at the Pisces, which is a sister ship, will be taking over. But this Bigelow larger Bigelow contingency plan is when the vessel just can't get out of the shipyard on a timely basis. Next slide. So just to kind of give it where we're at with some of those other pieces of the pie, obviously the Bigelow contingency plan has, our number one idea is looking at the Pisces, as the sister ship, their readiness plan has been drafted and it's being refined through the National Marine Fisheries Service and the Office of Marine and Aviation Operations. The Pisces is primarily the Southeast Fisheries Science Center's survey vessel. And it will become the primary backup for the Bigelow in case there are issues with the Bigelow. Obviously, there's some concerns here when we're looking at, well, when do you trigger that the Bigelow is not going to be available? How do we get the Pisces here? Is the Pisces ready? Is there funding? Is there a specific plan in place to have the Pisces kind of sitting and waiting? There's also concerns with this from the NTAP, particularly from the industry members, is that the agency feels that, getting the vessel from Mississippi to New England shouldn't be a problem. We could probably get it here in a week's time, where some of us more feel that this is probably more of a 2 to 3 week time period of getting that vessel up in here into the New England region and actually conducting, the survey tows as needed. Another option in the contingency plan is, looking at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center as having another vessel calibrated to the Bigelow. This proposal actually is on the table. It is in the hands of the Science Center's director, Dr. John Hare, and is being discussed at headquarters. And there's kind of an optimistic time frame that this will only take about a year to a year and a half to acquire a vessel. And this is actually a real world concern because as some of you know, that this is where the Gloria Michelle comes in. It's the vessel that conducts used to conduct the shrimp survey. It also is the Massachusetts State Survey. This vessel is it's ending its end of life. So there is this concern that there will be a new vessel coming online to fill in where the Gloria Michelle used to. And part 3 of the plan is, looking for an industry vessel that's calibrated to the Bigelow. Well, there's no progress on that, but, there are some commercial vessels in probably the New Jersey, Mid-Atlantic region that may be able to fit this bill. But like I said, we haven't really made any movement on that as the contingency plan has been moving forward. Next slide. So what we're really here for is an update of the IBS survey there, the industry-based survey. This is going to be a separate survey that's not calibrated to the Bigelow. So in essence, the theory is that this would be a whole new time series moving forward. And just to give an idea of how we got here, as we all know that in September, between the commission and the 2 councils had requested from the Science Center a white paper on what it would take to do, outlining what an industry-based survey would look like. And that was presented to all of us in the January-February time period. And there was a follow-on request from the Science Center to further develop, put some more meat on the bones of actually developing a pilot survey. Because the feeling was, yeah, we have a white paper, but we wanted to take it to the next step to make sure that this is something we wanted to move forward on. And there seems to be a lot of momentum behind everyone that, between the commission and the council and the industry and, the Science Center really feels that this is probably something we do want to move forward with. So the next slide, please. So where we're at right now is there's been some movement of how we're putting together of what a pilot would look like. We did have some early discussions at the full NTAP panel meeting in early February in Virginia, but we also had a more dedicated working group to really answer start drilling down what are some of the things that we would really like to see in an industry-based survey, and what could we look at in a pilot survey. One of the main objectives that we kind of felt was important is this industry-based survey should be able to work in wind farms. Obviously, we all know that wind energy areas are popping up theoretically, up and down the coast. So we're really looking at, can this industry-based survey through the pilot, can we determine, can we do this survey work within wind energy area farms? We feel that this is a possibility, a probability, because as we know, some of these areas that are already up and running, being developed in the southern New England region, do have vessel-specific monitoring, industry monitoring vessels in there. But keep in mind that those have different objectives as opposed to what our industry-based pilot survey would be doing. Our focus is on looking at what we would need for stock assessment needs. So looking at, indexes of abundance. Our plan was to kind of use the same, to use the same strata as what the Northeast Fisheries Science Center does for the Bigelow. Currently, there is some, the stratification for the Bigelow is under review, and if any changes come out of that, that would be applied to what we would do in this industry-based survey under the pilot. We feel that the focus of the industry-based survey, as we mentioned, is for stock assessment needs. So this is not a full-blown ecosystem type of survey. So where we were looking to truncate our depth strata to probably the 130 to 150 fathom max range instead of going out to the 200 plus. It would really be an analysis of what's the bang for the buck, where are we getting what we need for stock assessments, and kind of cutting it off, where we start losing that data set that really doesn't add to the stock assessment needs. Our survey focus, we are looking at multiple regions. It's not going to be just one specific area. So we are interested in looking in the Gulf of Maine area, the Georges Bank, the Southern New England, and the Mid-Atlantic. Under the pilot survey, we're looking to see what we can do between a 5 to 10 day window in each area, but not necessarily at the same time. The reason why we're looking at maybe doing it in different time periods, because this is probably even under a pilot, this is kind of a resource intensive between equipment, humans, vessels. So we're kind of looking to how we can do this on a cost savings approach as well. There has been discussion of what type of vessels, how much survey, is it going to be daytime, 24 hours? And what we've settled on is looking at similar sized paired vessels operating on a 12-hour per day basis over the 24 hours. And to answer the question of, well, day tows versus night tows, we figured we'd split it up more along the noon to midnight and the midnight to noon. So both vessels would be both surveying, the pairs would be surveying both the nighttime and the daytime to hopefully get away from some of the concerns of the bias of the day-night fishing. The survey gear approach, we agreed on that we're going to use the same trawl gear that is used on the Bigelow. That's the 400 by 12 four-seam net. But we're not going to use the same doors that are on the Bigelow. How we plan to approach the door question is using the rule rope or the restrictor rope that has gone through some study recently on the Dorona R. Basically, we're going to use that. It's a rope that's using to connect the two doors to kind of standardize the spread over multiple depths, and it also helps to standardize the gear across multiple platforms as well. So it kind of gets to, well, we know the gear should be doing the same thing regardless of who's towing it and where they're towing it. One of the other things that we discussed is that we don't feel an auto trawl system is necessary. The auto trawl system, for those that don't know, this is what's used on the Bigelow it's constantly paying and bringing in and putting out wire to make sure there's based on tension to theoretically keep the gear in line. But we feel that this is probably overkill, and this is also something that would potentially add to the costs of our pilot and overall if we did move forward with an IBS survey. What we're looking to collect under this pilot program, we're trying to see what we can collect, how much we can collect. So this not only includes the biological data, but we're going to be collecting net mensuration gear, all the electronics that are on the vessels, also looking at CTD casts, planktons, and acoustic data. We're trying to get an understanding of what we're going to collect. But one of the things that we're also looking at is trying to use what's available. So what's on the vessels currently. We would use their net mensuration gear or whatever electronics they have on the vessel. Some of the other objectives we're looking to under the pilot right now is we want to meet with other scientific survey crews in the region. Obviously, specifically, we're referring to the VIMS NEMAP survey folks, the Science Center folks, also the Maine, New Hampshire trawl folks, also the Massachusetts, to get an understanding of the sampling stations that are needed. Obviously, we would want to have some kind of portable system that can move from vessel to vessel. And, these things have already been developed across other platforms. So what does it take? Where could we save some time and energy and money in looking at what's already been created? We're also looking to develop some workshops with those interested vessel captains, owners that would be interested in participating in the pilot survey, just to give them an understanding of what the expectations are, what would they be doing for us, and what we could be doing for them to help them get this moving forward. So those are the things that we've worked through already, and I think we have a good handle on. If we move to the next slide, this is where we're still lacking on what we need to kind of work through. These are the elements that we still need to kind of think about, and I think we'll probably be looking at this over the next couple months between now and probably the summertime when NTAP has another full member meeting. One of the key questions is who's going to manage the pilot, as we develop it and go through an implementation process. Will this be directly with the Science Center, or will there be a third party that's going to be brought on board to do the pilot? And this is also kind of thinking not only just the pilot itself, but if we moved into a larger scale, there's resources that we need. And even if it's a third party entity, we need to include that there still will be resources needed from the Science Center. So we need to get a better handle on the management of the project. As I mentioned, these work sampling stations, we need to get an understanding of what's required for space and also the electrical requirements. Keep in mind, we're doing data collection, electronic data collection nowadays. So you're talking about computers, not only on deck for the length boards and for the tablets and what have you, but we're also having servers on board on the vessel as well. So there's obviously some additional electrical requirements that go beyond what a normal commercial operation would need. There's also the data management implications. We're going to be collecting a whole host of data. We'll be using multiple net mensuration gear, also multiple electronic type equipment. Will we be collecting that in same format, same frequency? So there's that question. Will we be able to kind of collate all that data across multiple platforms? Also, we're looking at what we need to kind of think through is what is the sampling, what is the biological sampling, and how much data we're going to collect. So we're looking at, the industry-based survey. Hopefully we'll understand of what's the volume and who's going to process all this stuff and who's also going to do the data analysis. So those are some of the questions that we're still thinking about data-wise. There are certain parts of the survey, the pilot survey, that we would think that would probably be more of on the water type review and refinement. We're specifically talking the scope of the wire, how far behind the boat is the gear going to be depending on depth. Also the tow speed and tow duration. We know that when the Northeast Fisheries Science Center went from the Albatross to the Bigelow, there was some changes in those components. So it's a kind of understanding of where we would like to see this industry-based survey looking at a time duration component to get an understanding of, are we collecting enough without going overboard? Obviously the costs are a big deal. We've had some back of the calculations of what we feel that this will cost, and a rather conservative estimate we came up with is $1 to $2 million. I know there's been some people looking around that are actually probably looking for more in the region of $3 million just to get this pilot survey up, and I think it's a good estimate because we want to have a good, robust pilot to inform if we went further on an industry-based survey. Also, some of the other discussion points that we need to work through is the statistical design of what this industry-based survey would look like under the pilot. Do we want to capture some of those shallower depth ranges that were lost when the Bigelow came on? The timing of the survey. Obviously, the highlight here is because, we talk about wind energy areas as one of the big elephants in the room when we talk about, loss of survey strata. But other, as we saw in the last presentation, we're seeing climate change effects. Do we want to focus this survey to kind of focus on, do we want to address how climate change has affected the catches in our surveys, current surveys? Do we want to look at maybe doing the survey at a different time period versus what's being conducted by the Northeast Fisheries Science Center? Also, we're thinking about, do we want to overlap with some of the other NEMAP surveys? How far inshore do we want to cover into some of those state water strata? And we also need to think about the design in itself when we're talking about the adaptability for the future loss of survey areas. Obviously, in the southern New England, mid-Atlantic region, what we're seeing now is a lot of these fixed station wind energy areas. There's potential for these offshore aquaculture operations that we're going to lose that we may or may not be to tow in and around. But keep in mind, in the Gulf of Maine and even in the southern New England, mid-Atlantic region, some of these further offshore areas, we're going to have floating wind, which is a whole different concern of how mobile gear type surveys would be able to operate in that. So that is basically those are the things that we're still trying to work through. I think we have some good ideas. We have a very good panel that hopefully we can get through that. We've gotten some really good feedback from the New England Council, the Mid-Atlantic Council of how we could kind of proceed. But that's where we are right now. So next slide. Oh, and so that's all I got for you guys. If open to any questions, concerns, comments, and I'll definitely bring it back to the larger group as we move forward on the IBS survey. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I'll look around the room. I don't think it could be stressed enough how important it is to get this going. And quite a few, so we appreciate the progress report, but there's still quite a bit left unanswered. So I'm going to go to Pat Kelleher first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dan, thanks for that report. It was excellent and a lot of really good background. One of your last slides, you gave a cost estimate of for the industry-based survey for this pilot of $1 to $2 million. ISFMP has highlighted within our appropriations priority the need for $3 million. I'm wondering what the disconnect there is. It because we have potentially data analysis and processing built into our numbers that's not in that number. Just want to make sure that the numbers that we're using line up with what the need is as we're talking to Congress.
Yeah, and I appreciate the question, Pat, and I think you've hit on it pretty well. I think when we were looking at the $1 to $2 million, we were thinking of hardware, software, the physicals. But as you mentioned, we didn't think beyond of who's going to do this data, who's going to do the management, who's going to do the processing. So I think you're in the ballpark there of closer to the $3 million when you consider the overall every component of the project.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments? John Clark.
Yeah, I'm just curious, Dan, do you have any idea how many industry vessels would be eligible to do this work that are the right size and all that, and B, would have interest in doing this?
I can answer the A a lot easier than I can the B. So we're trying to design the survey around being cost conscious, but also making sure we could have a larger pool than participants. So, some of the things we thought about not having an auto trawl. I mean, there's very few vessels in our region that have that. So by not having that, that opens up the pool of candidates. By not going out to the 200 fathoms depth, that also opens up to a larger pool of candidates that could participate in this. So we're probably thinking vessels in the 70 to 90 foot range, which, as we know, that's a pretty fair amount of vessels in that range. Anything larger, if you were talking about, the 24-hour sampling, and this kind of gets to our part 3 of the Bigelow contingency plan. When you're trying to replace the Bigelow with something that can do what the Bigelow does, you're really shrinking that pool down. So we're trying to make sure that we're having a program, a project that's getting what we need, but that can be open to more people. I would turn to Chairman Reed, who has more his ear to the ground, more with the industry of who would be interested. But I would think that there would be definitely folks interested in participating in this, because as we know, we always hear that the industry is like, we want to help you with your survey methods. Where can we get online and work through with this problem with you? So I think there will be interest. We just don't know who the candidates are yet that would be interested.
Thanks, Sam, for that answer. And I believe Chairman Reed had his hand up. So Eric, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the question, Mr. Clark. But we're not replacing the Bigelow with an industry vessel because of what Dan said. There are maybe 1 or 2 vessels that are capable of that, but in order to do it with industry vessels and accomplish the task, one of the reasons we went to the 12-hour day, noon to midnight, midnight to noon, was crew size. The horsepower and the tow capabilities of a lot of boats are reasonably the same, but when you're talking about a science crew of 15, 17, something like that people for 24-hour day operations, that's not, that nobody can carry that many people, or very few boats can carry that many people. So that's why we went to the 2-boat system where, you have room for the crew, 4 guys or 5 guys, and a room for a science crew 4 or 5 guys as well. So that brings a lot more vessels into the pool of possible candidates. And, the other thing is the use of the rule rope, that stabilizes the gear regardless of the vessel effect, or reasonably without the vessel effect. And, you're only towing 1 mile at 3 knots. So the horsepower capability of those boats can cover a very, very wide range. So there's a lot of reasons for the way we did things, mostly to get the data we need, but to get the industry, 1, to participate, and 2, to buy in, which they're all buying in already. So I think we'll have plenty of willing participants.
Thank you, Eric. Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Dan, I have more of a clarification question. You said the intention, I guess the stated intention was that the continuation for the IBS would be essentially starting a new survey. So continuation of the data sets. I'm thinking of the way we use stuff for stock assessments and use the historical data going back, the Albatross, the Bigelow, and combined, that we wouldn't really be able to get the continuation in the data sets for a lot of the species that we currently use with the groundfish survey.
Yeah, because this is a new data set, and that's the approach that we're taking. This will be a new data set. So using indexes of abundances, obviously we would need a number of years before we could start using that. But I think there are other data components, some of the environmental data collection, or even some of the biological, weight and age or maturity. That type of information could start feeding into the stock assessments sooner. But yeah, anytime a new survey starts, we understand that it's going to take a while before at least the index of abundance type information can be used in a stock assessment process.
Good, Chris. Thank you. Any others? All right, Dan, thanks again. We don't see any hands here, so I think that's going to wrap it for now, and we'll appreciate continued updates on this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All Our next agenda item is consider revised guidelines for resource managers on the enforceability of fishery management measures. For those newer commissioners and those of us that are somewhat forgetful, Kurt Blanchard has promised that he'll give a little background on this. So without any other introduction, I'll turn it over to Kurt. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the past year, the Law Enforcement Committee has conducted a review of the guidelines for resource managers on the enforceability of fishery management measures. Next slide, please. Law enforcement first prepared the guidelines for resource managers on the enforceability of fisheries management measures, the guidelines, back in 2000. In keeping with ISFMP direction to periodically review and update the guidelines, the LEC revised this document in 2002, 2007, 2009, 2015, and now the 6th edition in 2024. The LEC strongly encourages managers to consider the enforceability of all management regulations that are developed. We believe the guidelines can support and strengthen the effectiveness of the Commission's efforts to conserve our marine fisheries resources. Compliance with natural resource regulations help to ensure sustainable fisheries. Many factors contribute toward compliance, including but not limited to perceived legitimacy of the regulations and/or process, moral norms, voluntary compliance, enforcement, and enforceability. Next slide, please. The guidelines are organized into 5 sections for ease of reference. Section 1 is general enforcement operations. Section 2, enforcement tools. This is a new section. Section 3, general enforcement precepts. Section 4, enforceability ratings. And Section 5, the enforcement strategies and recommendations. Next slide, please. Under Section 1, this section provides a statement on the general enforcement operations that should be considered when implementing new management options or strategies. Available enforcement resources are maximized by enacting regulations that can be enforced at more than one point during fishing activity. Law enforcement relies on state and federal partnerships for at-sea patrol and inspection efforts. Officers work with these partners to provide effective at-sea enforcement of state and federal regulations, particularly those involving area, gear, and prohibited species restrictions. Next slide, please. Section 2, as I stated, is a new section. Enforcement tools are management measures that are not specifically designed to catch, not specifically designed to limit catch or effort, but to aid in the enforcement of other management measures that do so. Enforcement tools such as electronic reporting, pre-landing notifications, and VMS have improved the effectiveness of certain regulations by allowing enforcement staff to focus effort on high priority areas. These tools do not replace traditional enforcement, but rather complement patrol work and inspections. The requirement for some of these tools should be considered essential for effective enforcement of some management measures. For example, VMS for closed areas. New and emerging technologies such as cameras, ropeless fishing, and others should continue to be explored. Next slide, please. Section 3 are the general enforcement precepts. These are kind of the backbone of the thinking of law enforcement in regulatory development. Simplicity. The most enforceable regulations are those that are simple, realistic, easy to understand, and presented in an accessible way to the regulated community. Consistency. Regulations should make every effort to minimize exceptions and exemptions. Wherever possible, managers should adopt the same management measures among different fisheries management plans across different state boundaries and between state and federal waters. Stability. Regulations should avoid frequent changes. When this occurs, there must be concerted outreach and educational effort to adequately inform the public. Effectiveness. In general, the most effective regulations from an enforceability perspective are those based on controlling effort, closed areas and/or seasons, and not the outputs, catch quota and/or trip limits. And most importantly, safety. Regulations should be designed so they do not create an unintended safety at sea issue. Next slide, please. Section 4 talks about the enforceability ratings. The 2024 guidelines included a survey of 20 voting members of the LEC who numerically rated the enforceability of 27 management measures based on 3 categories: dockside, at sea, and airborne. The enforceability of each management measure was rated on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the least enforceable, 5 being the most enforceable. For each of the 3 categories, An average at-sea and dockside rating from the survey is also presented. It is important to note the survey indicated limited applicability for airborne resources in the enforcement of most management measures. Therefore, the airborne value was only included in the average ratings when it increased the average value of the management measure. If the airborne rating increased the average rating, the inclusive average is indicated in parentheses. The results of the updated survey are presented below in a visual matrix. Management measures were arranged in descending order of their average ratings from the survey. Responses receiving a score greater than or equal to 4 are color-coded in green. Those with an average score greater than or equal to 3 but less than 4 are color-coded in yellow, and those less than 3 are color-coded in red. Basically, green, slow down, stop. Next slide, please. So what you see before you now is the matrix. It's just for a quick reference snapshot of where law enforcement stands on different management measures. So as you kind of digest this a little bit, you'll see in the upper portion of the document: permits, slot limits, prohibited species, bag possession limit, low volume, minimum maximum size limits, closed seasons, and our latest or newest management measure that was added to this document is the tagging, labeling, marking of species. You'll see that where those are basically 4.00 or higher, all in green, good to go. As you work down the document, you pick up on closed areas and gear restricted areas. Those have the dual values where the airborne applicability was added to it. So you can see where the average of just dockside and at sea fell for closed areas, for example, at 3.26. With the added emphasis with airborne, it rose to 3.58. Again, important to note on this document, as you go to the bottom of the document where we get into the red zone, consistently over the last several editions of this document, and it continues to be, targeting prohibitions, limited drag and soak time always fall at the bottom. ITQs, IFQs, limited access programs, those still fall low, but I think that's based on the complexity of those types of programs. Next slide, please. Section 5 talks about the enforcement strategies and recommendations. This section provides information about each of the management measures that were considered in the guidelines. Included is a brief definition of the measures, its numerical rankings based on the survey results, and some thoughts for consideration when drafting regulations. For ease of organization, the management measures were listed alphabetically. In 2009, the LEC evaluated 19 management measures. In 2015, 26 management measures, and now in 2024, 27 management measures. Next slide, please. The tagging, labeling, marking of marine species. This was the added management measure for 2024. This slide's to show you two pieces. One, to talk about this new management measure, but also to show you the makeup of what each management measure is provided for within the document. So we define what the management measure is. In this particular instance, the act of placing an approved manufactured tag, label, or a manipulation / alteration of the respective marine species for the purpose of making a marine species, marking a marine species for a management purpose. We include the overall rating of it. On this particular case, 4.00 in the green zone, you're good to go. Recommendations that should be considered when adopting a regulation. Tag should be an approved device that is identifiable, traceable, and tamper-proof. The tag should be placed on a marine species in a location that will cause least harm to the species, whether alive or dead. When an alteration to a marine species, i.e. fin clipping, V-notching, or other, the requirements should be consistent among all jurisdictions. Improved documentation and labeling of fish and fish products would enable the law enforcement to track such products back to the harvester and the initial purchaser, and to intercept unlawful seafood products at various points between harvest and final sale for consumption. Next slide, please. The LEC gratefully acknowledges some of our current and past members who contributed time and expertise to the guidelines. We thank NOAA Fisheries Office of Law Enforcement, NOAA General Counsel, U.S. Coast Guard Districts 1 and 7, this group being the authors of the enforceability precepts for the Northeast Regional Fisheries Management Councils, dated June 2013, for them sharing their publication with us and allowing us to incorporate selected material from this document. I'd like to thank staff here, Tony Kearns, Tina Berger, Madeline Massanti for their assistance in updating the document. And we also acknowledge the opportunity afforded to our committee by the commissioners and the staff at ASMC to revise the guidelines and to make them available for routine use and reference. I'm available for any questions, and I believe we need to ask for approval of this document.
Tony says correct, so. So let's start with any questions or comments for Kurt. I'll look around the table. I don't, John Clark.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, Kurt. I was just curious, one complaint we hear often is individually marked gear, like in this case, crab pots. I know from the enforcement side, counting them is very difficult, and yet there's a lot of concern that some might have too many out there. Has the LEC looked into something like drones and cameras on that for counting? Because I know how difficult it's got to be if somebody's allowed to have 300, 500 pots out there to try to count everything.
Well, it's difficult to count fixed gear for traps and trap limits based on a visual aerial type observation. We can detect where the gear is, but ultimately you're not going to get a final count unless you're hauling that gear. And to have those resources to do that, many states do have the resources to haul gear. There's a lot of concerns in hauling of gear, liability concerns, things like that. Airborne, the interesting on airborne is only about 60% of the agencies have some type of airborne capability. And we broke that out between traditional aircraft, drones, who has both, and who may not have any. And basically 36% of the agencies had zero use of aircraft. And the other ones that did have, whether you're using drones, for example, is still working through some of the policy issues and all that type of privacy concerns with drone use. Traditional aircraft are typically pretty good to go, but that's usually a shared resource, maybe from our federal partners to a state partner or from a state to state partner.
Other hands, Roy and then Craig.
Thank you for the excellent report and the excellent visual. I noticed in that visual you used at the very end of your talk where it ranked the various techniques. I couldn't help but notice that targeting prohibitions were ranked at the very bottom of that scale in the red zone. And yet we spent a great deal of time at yesterday's meeting and prior meetings talking about targeting proposals, the very same thing that's ranked the lowest. So I just wanted to highlight that. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. Craig.
I want to expand on what John's question was. And I don't know what's enforceable, and that's why I'm asking you this, is I don't know what's really enforceable if you go before a judge. So if there was a time stamped with latitude and longitude of such gear, would that be admissible? And would you think that would be valid? Say if you took that with a drone of a time stamped position, so from me to you, trap gear, boing, 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 you take a latitude and longitude, apply that to that. So I don't know if there's a certain calibration that we have to do, like weights and measures, but wouldn't that be a reliable source in front of a judge? I would think. I would, if I went to vote for that, I think I'd have a concern.
So whether drone use and trying to stamp or location stamp on a drone or GPS use on the vessels or whatever, respective states and agencies have to prove the reliability of the device recording that. So that type of information needs to be produced in prosecuting cases. So it does get a little bit complex on where you're trying to get that. You could get into a situation depending on the level of the case, whether you might need industry manufacturers to come in and talk about and prove the reliability of those devices. GPS in general has been more accepted within the courts, but it can rise to that level of complexity of having other experts come in.
Jay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nice presentation. Kurt. I also really liked the matrix. I bet that's shocking to you in particular. But so this is more of a comment, but I really did appreciate this, and I think it could be really useful as a guide. So, you know, as we're developing an addendum or an amendment or whatever, you know, we are proposing different types of regulations. We can use this as a guide to sort of flag, instead of, we often, you know, bounce back to the law enforcement committee to sort of have you guys verbalize what you now, you know, put together for us. So I just offer that thought that we could use this as a guide and maybe include it in some of the information that we are putting out for the public to see as well.
We can, well, the resources available on the website, right? So there is that tool, but we could also have staff, when we're pulling tools, remind the board either in the PDT document or in the staff presentation to say enforcements, this is a green or a red or a yellow on the enforceability, from the enforceability guidelines. I think, as Kurt said, some things have to be in context of what's going on, but you know, the law enforcement rep can also provide that context during the board's discussions.
Right. So
Yeah.
just to follow up, I'm in complete agreement. Yeah. So however it lives, we can sort of think about that, but I agree. Like, so then I think it changes from, you know, what does enforcement think about this, to now kind of digging into, we have this general statement of what enforcement thinks about this, put it in the context of this particular action, and how does it fare. So I think it changes the conversation a little bit, makes it better in my view.
So also just to your point, and thank you for those comments, the discussion around the table with the final approval of this from the law enforcement committee was that the representatives that sit at the board table representing law enforcement needs to reference this more. As you know, it's been around since 2000, and you know, maybe anecdotally somebody might reference it, but we don't incorporate it typically in our responses. And I think that is something we could do better.
That you had a comment. Thank you, Kurt.
Well, if a motion would be in order, Mr. Chairman, be happy to make one.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm so sorry to everybody, but I have a question. I know we're kind of behind on time here. But so we have the information on what is and isn't enforceable. Some of the stuff that really isn't so much is stuff that is kind of really important to us, right? It's a way to manage, especially in. So I'm just curious, I'm not going to put you on the spot, and we have, you know, in the interest of time, so a yes or no, has there been discussions around finding a way to do these things, say soak times, for example, that at least it's in there, or even targeting for the most egregious cases? You absolutely know those nets have been there forever, and you know, it's just a mess right now, but you can't pull it because there's no regulation on it. Has there at least been a discussion on finding a way that we're not asking you to enforce it at all times for everybody, but that there's something for the most egregious cases?
So the simple answer to that is yes, we do consider it, and we don't. We know that managers and these boards have a job to do and a mission to complete, and we want to support that. So we don't discount any one of these management measures. It's just important to know, like, and we've mentioned it on different occasions, like we use limited drag and soak time. The amount is so manpower intensive to monitor that, and because you'll have to be there at time of set, you'll have to be there at time of haul, things like that, and to try to monitor those types of things. That's in a sense, that's why we always talk about, or we talk more about, you know, use of technologies, because some of that can help us do our job better. It's an additional enforcement tool. It supports a management measure that you might be trying to facilitate, and then we actually now have the means to be more proactive in supporting that.
Thank you, and I appreciate all the work that went into this, and it was a great report. So I'll look to Pat then for a motion. I appreciate that, Pat.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Kurt, I really appreciate this report. It's clear that this is not a static report. You're making changes to this report based on the comfort level within the enforcement community about different things. I was able to witness some of those conversations a couple days ago. So appreciate the work on this. And with that thought, I would move to accept the modified report for usage by management.
Second by John Clark. First one I have his hand up out of many. If you want. I'll read it into the record as written, Pat. So the motion here with a second is move to approve the revised guidelines for resource managers on the enforceability of fishery management measures. Any discussion on the motion? Oh, go ahead, Adam.
No other discussion, just one other question about it. The enforcement element, I was surprised that out of these 27 management measures, prosecute or prosecution was only referred to for a half dozen of them in the extended part here. At one end of the spectrum, that says to me, well, 21 of these have a high percentage of being able to be prosecuted when used. When we bring it before a court, there's a lot of, the court says, yeah, this is good information. On the other end, I'm concerned that enforcement says we're throwing all these things out here. The courts don't really give a darn. Maybe there wasn't as much focus on the ability to prosecute here because enforcement's just kind of thrown their hands up on the lack of prosecution that occurs. I'm hoping the answer is closer to my first part, but I'd like to know your thoughts on why we didn't hear more about the success level of prosecution with these management measures.
Maybe it's unintended in there, but I think the success level of prosecution comes from the values being rated higher. I don't have that right in front of me as far as which ones had prosecution mentioned in each and every one of them, but I suspect that those were in the lower columns, more in the red columns or the low yellows. So I think it's implied that they're more enforceable. If they're more enforceable, then that prosecution element comes into that also. Thank you, Al.
Okay, thanks. Any further discussion? Not seeing hands. Any objections to the motion? None? Okay, we'll consider that passed by consent. And once again, thank you. Next up, and sorry for the delay, Dr. Katie Drew on stock assessment updates.
So I'll make this quick. We have a number of assessments going on right now, but I'm only going to provide an update on two that did not have board meetings this week. The Riverhang benchmark assessment we're still finalizing the dates for the peer review, but we plan to have that completed by the end of this month so that it can be presented at the August meeting. And similarly, the sturgeon assessment update is well in progress and will be ready for presentation at the August meeting as well. So thank you.
Excellent, thanks, Katie. Any questions for Katie? No, okay, great. The next item on this agenda is review of non-compliance findings. There aren't any, and the good news there means that there will be no need for a business session after this. And we have two items for other business, and so I'm gonna start with Tony Kearns, and then Pat, I'm gonna go to you when we talk yield, and actually even on the other items.
We have two letters for consideration by the policy board on behalf of the lobster board. And Pat, I will introduce the first letter for you, and then you can talk about the second letter. The first letter did not have it was just a consent letter, so we don't have a physical motion on the board for you all to read, but it's to send a letter to the New England Fishery Management Council highlighting the key points of the technical committee's report on the the conduct of the lobster fishery on the northern edge of Georges Bank. The council is considering management action to open 2 potential areas to the scallop fishery. So the Lobster Technical Committee was tasked to describe the abundance and makeup of the lobster resource on the Georges Bank, and then potential impacts to the scallop gear for those lobster. The additional piece is that we are going to try, if we can find the available information, to provide some economic data for that fishery that is occurring and provide that to the council in the letter as well.
Sheree?
Yes, thank you. Would it be possible to add into that any sort of, not to say it's possible, any sort of thought about offshore wind and any sort of displacement of gear that may occur in that area in the future, which would also be a consideration for the northern edge?
I think that we could express concerns for potential displacement into those areas, whether or not we would have that data available for us now, or we would express the desire to see if the council can analyze that type of information in that letter, if that is the pleasure of the board.
Dan, you have a comment?
I suggest we add a line to the letter that might say that if the lobster fleet is displaced from the area by the scallopers, bear in mind there's going to be additional displacement to the offshore lobster fleet when the offshore wind areas are developed. So I think conceptually, I think Cherie's onto something, that it's a second level of stress on that, attributable to displacement on that fleet.
Okay, so those are, with that addition, any objection by the policy board to moving this letter forward? Seeing none. So Tony, do you want to introduce the second letter? Go right to Pat. Go ahead, Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday there was, I don't know if, did you have that language you were going to put up? Yesterday also on the, several months ago, it seems like now, the lobster board met to discuss some of the challenges we have with the gauge increase as it pertains to trade with Canada and some of the timing issues. So a motion was made, which is up on the board right now, and it was recommended that it be sent to the policy board for consideration and approval. I would say, and I'd look to the maker of this motion, that we did include in the full last sentence, the letter would request Canada increase minimum size for lobsters in the Gulf of Maine. But the trade issue also pertains to lobsters that would come from the Gulf of St. Lawrence as well. So we may want to just be, I'll look to the maker of the motion, but we may want to just be silent on the Gulf of Maine and just say the minimum size of lobsters on the same schedule as the commission.
I concur with that.
Seeing some other heads nod. Any other comments on the fine tuning of this yet? Let's get it up. Let's get the motion corrected before we move forward.
I'm being directed to read this. So, on behalf of the American Lobster Management Board, move that the commission to send a letter to Canada DFO and relevant Canadian industry associations as identified by the board chair and the executive director. This letter would request that Canada increase the minimum size for lobster on the same schedule as ASMFC, or soon as possible, as captured in Addendum 27.
Right, so this is moving forward on behalf of the American Lobster Management Board. I see a hand up Mike Ruccio, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Not to muddy the waters on this, I think as we've discussed before, when we've had issues where the Lobster Board in particular has discussed communications with Canada and DFO, I would encourage the Lobster Board, certainly, you're well within your rights to do as you please on this, but to engage NOAA and our international trade group. We do have regular bilaterals that occur government to government. So however to loop those in, whether they're part of the letter, either in review or signatories, or whether they're just kind of looped in as a courtesy, I strongly encourage that. I think it can help in the overall messaging to have multiple fronts of communication on that. Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, I appreciate Mike's comments on that, and I don't disagree at all. I'm not sure we need to capture it in the motion itself, or as far as the letter is concerned. But I think from a policy board perspective, the record could clearly show that we would agree that we need to engage with NOAA on a continuous basis on this issue as it relates to trade.
Yeah, I agree as well, and I think that as we continue to update the Lobster Board on this, that we'll reiterate that cooperation as well. So with that, as I mentioned, we have a motion before us that doesn't need a second. So is there any further discussion? I see, yeah, I see someone who thought better. Any other discussion on this? Okay, is there? Any objection to this? Not seeing any. Okay. We'll consider this approved by policy board by consent. And oh, okay. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. No problem. We do have one other agenda item, and that's the LEC update. Kurt.
I was thinking we might skip that based on time. So I will keep it super fast. We conducted a hybrid meeting today, this week with the spring meeting. The committee welcomed Brian Scott of New Jersey Fish and Wildlife as a new LEC representative from New Jersey. And Captain Scott Pierce, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, transitioned into the role of chair of the LEC. Lieutenant Delane Brown from New Hampshire Fish and Game was elected to the position of vice chair. We covered some species issues. We had discussions on striped bass, Atlantic cobia, spiny dogfish. I won't jump too far into the details on that. And American lobster. We had a really good presentation on the American lobster piece. The LEC discussed the status of Addendum 30 of Amendment 3 of the Lobster Plan. Specifically, discussions centered around the Mitchell provision and how the addendum will interface with Addendum 27. The LEC will continue to follow the development of this addendum and offer comments as appropriate. Some of our general business issues we discussed. We had a presentation on the North American Wildlife Law Enforcement Accreditation Program. Colonel John Cobb and Captain Rob Ham from Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources provided a presentation on new wildlife law enforcement accreditation being implemented through CFOR. Created in 2022, NALEA offers a comprehensive accreditation program for wildlife law enforcement agencies. Their team is composed of experts in the field who are dedicated to ensuring the highest standards of professionalism among member agencies. This is a credentialing program that is recognized by the U.S. Department of Justice. We had a good conversation and a good presentation from representatives of the Maine Marine Patrol and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on the status of the Elver fishery. Information was shared about the Canadian Elver fishery closure and its impacts on domestic fishery. Some shared success stories were discussed as a deterrent to illegal trade of this high value resource. We also discussed or continue to discuss the Interstate Wildlife Violators Compact. The committee continued to discuss on how best to implement and use the Interstate Wildlife Violators Compact. Specifically, state agencies share best practices among each state on how to model their respective programs. As you know, I've jumped into trying to offer you guys some notable casework that's being done out there. So I'm going to jump through these pretty quick. A federal grand jury in the District of Puerto Rico returned an indictment on February 29, 2024, charging 2 Dominican nationals with smuggling goods from the United States, Lasiac trafficking and failure to heave to. During a morning patrol, a Customs and Border Protection aircraft detected a suspicious vessel approximately 39 nautical miles north of Arecibo, Puerto Rico. The United States Coast Guard responded to interdict the vessel, which was flagless and outfitted for smuggling. Upon approach, the defendants failed to heave to, obligating the United States Coast Guard to neutralize the vessel. Strong words there, but yes, they shot out the motors. The defendants were caught on board in possession of approximately 22 bags of over 5,000 live American eels per bag that were being transported from Puerto Rico to the Dominican Republic. This case is still under investigation through NOAA and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Offices of Law Enforcement, and the case is being prosecuted through the Environmental Crime Section of the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney's Office of the District of Puerto Rico. Just a side note on this is the case being prosecuted by the Environmental Crime Section of the U.S. Department of Justice. Wayne Hettenbeck sits on our committee. He's such a high-level guy to have as an advisor and a consultant in our deliberations. He's invaluable to us. A little closer to home. New Jersey officers charged a North Carolina commercial fishing vessel owner and operator after identifying violations against New Jersey's possession in excess of a daily limit license. The license allows commercial fishing vessels to enter New Jersey ports with summer flounder and black sea bass that will eventually be landed in other states. The vessel must properly be licensed, and the excess fish must be lawfully landed and sold in the intended state. In this situation, the vessel operator landed a trip limit of New Jersey summer flounder in Cape May and declared his intention for the excess summer flounder to be on board to be landed and sold in Virginia. When the vessel left New Jersey, it immediately transited to Massachusetts, landing in New Bedford. New Jersey officers contacted Massachusetts authorities, who conducted an inspection of the vessel and determined the excess summer flounder was unlawfully filleted at sea and concealed in various places on board. The operator admitted to also discarding an additional amount of excess summer flounder on the way into port. The vessel captain was also charged in Massachusetts for landing summer flounder without a permit and for filleting at sea. And the final case I'd like to highlight, Connecticut ENCOM police from several regions of the state worked collaboratively to patrol the lower Housatonic River from November 1st through 2023 through April 9th, 2024, sorry. This area is a known hotspot for striped bass poaching, especially during the winter months. 14 officers voluntarily worked overnight shifts utilizing fish and game detection canines, night vision, and surveillance to identify violations and take enforcement action. This enforcement initiative accounted for the following documented activity: $32,343 in fines levied for striped bass violations, 385 counts of violations of Connecticut striped bass regulations were documented, 374 calls of service, 120 violators were issued an infraction or a warning, and 49 striped bass were located by the Fish and Game Detection Canine. Additionally, one offender had his fishing license suspended. This was due to being cited for violations on 4 previous instances during this initiative. He was caught a 5th time and charged again with fishing while suspended, along with new striped bass violations. Mr. Chair, that's my brief report. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kurt. And I'm going to ask a very specific question of policy board here, and that is, do you have any urgent questions or comments of Kurt? Otherwise, I would strongly encourage if you could reach out to him offline. Lauren?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll certainly make this brief. Several examples of what you just said, sir, related to something that is of concern to me. We've talked in the past about violators considering fines simply a cost of doing business. Would the example of the person who had his fish license suspended, wouldn't that, if he's been already caught 4 times, this is 5th time, wouldn't we need to increase the pain on that guy to make sure that there was a cessation of this kind of activity? Thank you.
I appreciate that, Lauren. In this particular case, this guy is egregious. He was paying fines of up to $2,000 for each of the previous offenses, so it was a cost of doing business. And it's my understanding that Connecticut's moving forward with revocation of his privileges. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on to other business. And Pat, I'm going to start with you, since it was your request to put this item that Mitch brought to us on there. So if you can give us a little bit of an intro, and we'll allow Mitch some time as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be brief, and maybe we can try to wrap this up very quickly. But Mr. Feigenbaum raised some issues associated with Canada. I want the policy board to know that the Maine Department of Marine Resources has been heavily involved with DFO in Canada. We've had them down as guests, both policy and law enforcement, at very high levels within DFO. To understand how we manage our elbow fishery in Maine. We've gone over all of our laws and rules with them. I've met with the fisheries minister down at the Boston Seafood Show to stress the importance of the totality of these laws and rules as they exist within the state of Maine, and how they have really helped subside all of the other illegal activities that we have on the East Coast. And I think that was highlighted within the law enforcement reports that while we're never going to get rid of poaching of eels, the level of poaching up and down the East Coast has certainly subsided. And I think that our law enforcement committee reps could verify that. But what we have happening now in Maritime Canada is what we were seeing when the price spiked in the United States and we didn't have these other rules in place. I was invited to speak to Parliament, the Senate subcommittee, Parliament for Fisheries and Oceans. I presented all of the information to them. It's clear that there is interest in trying to move forward within Canada, but I think it is really imperative upon us as a body to signal to DFO, in maybe not such a ordinary way, that that we would encourage them to act as quickly as possible, because what is happening in Canada is impacting the domestic trade, the domestic legal trade of elvers in the United States. And you can clearly see that with the price per pound issue that is being paid in Maine this year. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would recommend sending a letter to the U.S. Embassy in Canada and to the ambassador of the United States to Canada, and request that he encourage the country to implement rules and regulations that would be protective of the resource, because ultimately this is a resource question. I'm not going to speak to the validity of what some report is saying that Mitch represented, but Maine Marine Patrol is directly engaged with Canada. We're getting weekly updates on the illegal activity there. The Law Enforcement Committee probably heard a lot of details in their closed session as it pertains to what's happening in Canada. Hundreds of arrests. 20 or 30 trucks have been seized. The amount of illegal activity is staggering, far beyond what we probably saw in this country, actually. So I think it's imperative that we voice our concerns to them through appropriate channels.
Okay, since we're starting off with a motion, I'd like to get that motion up. I'll look for a second. I'll keep it to the board first, Mitch, but I'll allow you to speak to this as well. Thank you. A second from Sheree.
Pat, can you help us a little? That was a lot. And so how do you want us to concisely put it in the motion?
And I moved to send a letter to the U.S. ambassador to Canada, encouraging Canada to implement rules and laws as quickly as possible to ensure the protection of the American eel resource.
Sure, you're still okay with that. I realize we haven't gotten it up yet, but as Pat has worded it.
Mr. Chair, perhaps while they're perfecting the motion, I would make a similar comment, I think, on this level of correspondence. Again, I think the policy board is both in its rights to communicate how it sees fit, but looping in the federal agency that is a management partner could be a benefit here. So engaging IATC and just kind of looping in NOAA would be of value. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike. That is acknowledged and agreed to. Pat, do you feel like wording is appropriate here? Okay, Sheree, are you seconding this? Okay, so we have a motion with a second. Any discussion on this motion? Yep. All right, so I don't see any hands from the board. So Mitch, do you have any comments? If you do, yeah, if you could quickly.
I do, and it will be very quick. I just want to assure the board that Ambassador Cohen and his staff have been briefed on this issue. They've devoted resources to this issue. They've been very receptive to input on this issue. And when we made this, the industry made a similar request to Ambassador Cohen's staff, please ask the ambassador to make this outreach. And the response was rather supportive, except the fact that such a request really needs to come from official sources, not a constituent, which is why I brought this to my colleagues at ASMFC, including Pat and others. So thank you very much for the consideration. I think this will be a very meaningful step. And I'd like to say to Mike, I look forward to meeting him and talking about some of the ways NOAA could actually play a helpful role in this matter as well. Thank you.
Yeah, no, very good. Thank you. So not seeing any further hands for comment. Is there any, oh, sorry, go ahead, Sheree.
Mike, while I appreciate NOAA's involvement, but should we also be including U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in that as a partner to this process, considering their management of eels?
Yeah, we'll acknowledge that as our looping in our federal partners. And yeah, okay. So with that is I'll just ask, is there any objection to this motion for this letter? Okay, not seeing any, so approved by consent. Hopefully that covers everything unless there's any other, again, urgent other items to come before the board. Oh, Bob.
Just more of a statement than a conversation provoking thing, I hope. We've been notified by a couple of states that you may not have received your invoice for your annual commission dues or appropriations. If your state did not receive that invoice, let us know. They should have been sent out March 29th, I believe, but we have been told by a couple of states they didn't get them. So I don't know if this was part of our email glitch, but if you didn't get yours, let us know. And that's all. Thanks. Thanks, Joe.
No problem. Noted. With that, I'd like to adjourn our meeting. As mentioned before, there's no need for business session. Thank you.